I got it this morning. This morning I want to just share some thoughts under the heading of images, images of God. Um, Shortly after I became involved in the independent movement many years ago, one of the things that I was made aware of was that many people who are in this movement, they are very much against uh, figurines. They're against people putting up pictures and figurines in their homes, and they consider it almost a sign of apostasy if you even have photographs of yourself or of your family. I've met people like this, and at the very least, I found many of them were opposed to having figurines around the home. I'm not really that kind of person who is really attracted to little figures around the place. So it didn't matter here or there to me, but I found it interesting that people had this approach. And there are even some people who believe that if you have these little figurines around, they are really symbols of idols, and you actually attract demonic spirits into your home. And that's an interesting point of view. This morning I want to talk about images of God. And so I mentioned that in starting because that is where most people will come from when they discuss this subject. But I'm going to go to the Bible and see what we can learn or what we can remind ourselves about. It's hard to find something new that we don't know, but sometimes, as I always say, a reminder is sometimes as good as hearing something for the first time. So I'm going to go to the Bible, and we're going to use that as a basis of our study this morning, as always. All right, here we go.
Brother David.
Yes, Sister Anita.
Before you begin, didn't you say, maybe I missed it, you say you was going to talk about Ellen G. White and...
This afternoon.
Oh, this afternoon. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Okay then.
All right. Of course, all of us are aware of the major reason for this antipathy to images is Exodus chapter 20 and verse 4. In the third commandment, it says, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me." So the third commandment says we are not to make any image. We're not to make any likeness of anything in heaven or in earth or under the earth. And it goes on to add we shouldn't bow down to them nor serve them. So this is the basis for the idea that some people have, that we should never have any photographs or any kind of figurines in our home. Idolatry is always represented in the Bible as something that God finds very distasteful. He's against it. In 1 Samuel 15 and verse 23, Samuel says to Saul, "For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry." And we know what happened was that as a result of this, Saul was rejected from being king. So you see here that idolatry is kind of equated with witchcraft, rebellion, stubbornness, iniquity, all of those things. So idolatry is clearly something that God finds very distasteful. He does not tolerate idolatry at all. In fact, over and over, you find that Israel was punished and eventually rejected because they made idols and worshiped the idols. The very first apostasy that Israel got into when they were delivered from Egypt at the Exodus was that they made this golden calf and they worshipped this calf, and 3,000 of them, I think it was 3,000 of them died that day because Moses, the Levites went through and slaughtered all those who were involved in worshiping this calf. So idolatry is one of the great sins that we find highlighted in the Bible. And so because of this, people are very, probably it's better to be cautious. Yes, they are cautious about images because images are usually associated with idols. Now, if you ask the question, why is it that idolatry is so offensive to God? I suppose we could come up with some ideas, but I'm going to suggest one or two things. First of all, idolatry distorts the image of God. I think you can understand what I mean. When a person makes an image that looks like a cow and he worships that image, he says it represents his God, but he makes the image like a cow. You're bound to have a low estimation of God if you think that God can be made to, God appears in the form of a cow. You know, in Hinduism, they have many gods. You have the elephant god, you have Hanuman, the monkey god, you have Ganesh, the elephant god. You have different animal representations of God. And always, what an image does is it belittles God in your mind, and you have unworthy concepts of God. That is why idolatry is so abhorrent to God. It brings God down to the level of the creature, and you cannot rise above what you worship. You cannot rise above what you worship. You tend to be like the thing that you worship. And so it distorts the face of God. It distorts the image you have of God. Whenever you set up an image and you say this represents God, it distorts the image of God. One of the professing Christian denominations that has a heavy emphasis on images is the Catholic religion, Catholic faith. Catholics have images of Mary, images of the so-called saints, images of Jesus. And one of the things I notice about many of these images is that they are grotesque, you know, distorted images, horrible looking in some cases. And some of them are even frightening. When you look at some of the images that they have of Jesus on the cross, if you look at Catholicism historically, some of these images are really ugly. And they say, the Catholic religion says that they do not worship images, but they use images to help them to focus their attention on God or on the objects of their veneration. But the thing is that when people talk like this, they fail to consider the nature of humanity. Human nature is to become involved in what you can see and feel, and what you see and feel, it eventually affects your perspective of what you are dealing with. Just to give you a simple illustration of this, I've seen people look at I've seen men look at pictures of women until they became infatuated, they became obsessed. They would say that they fell in love, but I mean, this is a distorted concept of love. But they became infatuated, they became obsessed by simply looking at a picture. And when they actually met the person, it was completely different from the concept they developed looking at that picture. When they met the person, one of the things I've found is that most of the women who are really, they appear very attractive outwardly, beautiful, lovely face, eyes, hair, body, everything is so nice. When you meet them, many times you don't want to maintain that acquaintance because the character is so distasteful. Unfortunately, when you are attractive outwardly, it often leads to vanity and being full of yourself. So you have something ugly that overrides what seems to be so beautiful. But the point I'm making is that the problem with an image is that it distorts our perception of the real thing. And this is why God said that they should not make an image of God. This is why when God presented himself to the Israelites in an image, what he gave them was a box. He gave them a golden box that was called the Ark of the Covenant. And he put symbols inside of this box that was supposed to represent his character, the Ten Commandments and the other things that represented his interaction with the Israelites. And this became to them the only thing that they needed to know about God. It became the only thing that they needed to know about God, because God forbade them to make any kind of image, and he wanted them to have a concept of God that did not involve their own perspectives. So it's interesting. What I find interesting is that these days it seems that there's a great deal of emphasis on what God looks like. Look at this picture. This is traditional. This is what I grew up with. This is what most of the world grew up with. The image of what Jesus looks like. And of course, recently there has been a backlash. These days, I see a lot of this kind of thing. All right. Black people are rebelling and they're saying that Jesus was a black man and they want something they can identify with, and they create a perspective, an image, a view of Jesus that is like themselves. Most of you might recognize in this something called the Shroud of Turin. If you have heard of the Shroud of Turin, it's a cloth, it's a piece of cloth, ancient bit of cloth that they claim it has the image of a man, a crucified man, and it's imprinted on the image. It's in a Catholic cathedral in the city of Turin. Here over in the left, you have the face, the actual face that they can see imprinted on the cloth. Here in the middle and on the right, you have an image that they have developed. And this is an artist's perspective on what it would have looked like, what that person would have looked like, the person that is imprinted in this shroud. Of course, like with everything that comes from the Catholic Church, there is great suspicion as to whether this really was the cloth that they wrapped Jesus in. According to the Catholic Church, this Shroud of Turin is the cloth that they wrapped Jesus in when he died, and they carried his body in it. And so his image was imprinted on this cloth until today. So traditionally, this has come to be the typical image when artists do a depiction of Jesus. This is the image they kind of base it on. And if you look on the middle and on the right, these are artists' conceptions of what this person might have looked like who died and who was wrapped in this shroud. Of course, I don't for one moment believe that this was the cloth that Jesus was wrapped in. The Catholic Church is famous for these kinds of forgeries. There are several churches in Europe that claim to have what is called the Holy Prepuce. And you might not know what that is, but the prepuce is the foreskin of a circumcised child. And there are several churches in Europe, Catholic churches, that claim to have the foreskin of Jesus' circumcision, which is, I mean, I don't even have to comment on that. That is so ridiculous. But you know, it's typical of the Catholic Church. They claim to have relics, bits of the cross. I mean, they are famous for their obsession with idolatry and with images and with little relics, what they call relics. And you're supposed to go and touch these relics or view them or kiss them, and you have great good fortune coming into your life, great blessings coming into your life. The Catholic Church is very poorly disguised pagan idolatry. But anyway, so they have the Shroud of Turin, and these are artists' conceptions that they have developed as a from this Shroud of Turin. And I suppose most of us might know this. This is for me probably one of the most distasteful of all, because this is, I think it was artists from it's I don't know exactly. I don't know if it's from the History Channel or it's from the BBC. Somebody commissioned some archaeological historians or whatever they were to do some kind of idea of what Jesus might have looked like based on their ideas of the culture and the kind of people of their times. These are, of course, they are atheistic evolutionists. And what offends me about this depiction, they say this is what he probably looked like. What offends me is that this is almost similar to their idea of what they call a caveman. If you understand these evolutionists and the kind of depictions of these cavemen with their slanting, short foreheads and their, you know, distorted features. This looks like a person who is not very smart. Maybe it's my perception, but this is what I see. Not a very smart person, kind of slightly fanatical and lacking in intelligence, just the way it is put together. And I find it very offensive, but kind of typical of the kind of unbelief that prevails in the world today. So Anyway, the point I'm making is that you find that the idea of the idea of the physical features of Jesus, the physical features, the physical appearance of divinity is very important to the majority of the world. This is what I would call the carnal focus, the carnal perspective. It is where people believe that what you appear on, like on the outside is most important. And I want to apply this to the question we are looking at. The real question is this: what is God really like? That's the real question. The reason why God objects to images, why God objects to idolatry, is because they distort our understanding of what God is really like. That is a problem. We humans tend to miss the point. It's not having a figurine in your home. It's not having photographs in your home. The real question is, what do these images or these photographs do to your perspective of God? That's the point. It's images or pictures in relation to your perspective of God. That's the point. And if we don't understand this, what we might end up being is just blind worshippers, people who just follow the route, follow the road, follow the rules, follow the instructions without understanding what we're doing. That is what God really objects to, something that distorts the image of God. And in this sense, this is why we who believe the truth about God, we say that the Trinity is an idol. We say that the Trinity is a verbal image, is a mental image that is more dangerous than any physical image that people ever set up, because the point is, what does it do to your concept of God? That's the problem with an image. And I hope that this can be something that we can thoroughly understand and properly and thoroughly integrate. What is God like? Now, God made a strange statement. Strange maybe to us today, maybe not so strange, but it's an interesting statement. When he was talking to Moses in Exodus 30 and verse 20, and he gave Moses this statement because Moses had asked him, I beg you, show me your glory. Show me your glory. I'm kind of amazed when I see that, because first of all, I wonder what was going through Moses' mind. What did he want? It's an interesting question. I mean, your answer may be as good as my answer, but I don't know. You see, you are finally in the presence of God, and you have the opportunity to speak to Him. What do you want? What are you looking for? You know, there's always the story when you read. When I was small and I used to read fairy tales, there was always this, that when somebody appears to you from the supernatural world, they grant you three wishes, and you have the chance to make three wishes. And this man wishes for money, and this woman wishes for this. But Moses got his chance. He was in the presence of God, and what did he ask for? He says, I beg you, show me your glory. I guess he really wanted to know God better. The desire of his heart, the dream, was to know God as best as he possibly could. And God says, yes, I'm going to show you my goodness. But then God says, thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live. Wow. And that's a striking statement, because, I mean, God is trying to make a point here. I'm sure that God is focused on the reality. I don't know what Moses was asking for, but God is saying something to him. God is saying, I'm going to show you what I can show you, but don't expect to see everything. Because there's a certain aspect of me that if I were to reveal myself, if I were to unveil myself in my fullness before you, you would die instantly. You cannot survive if I show you my face. And it's a very provocative statement, because you're thinking, what was God meaning? Did he mean you cannot see my physical face? Or did he mean you cannot see my spiritual appearance? What is it about God that is so amazing, so glorious, that if you see it, you will cease to exist? That is interesting. But as we proceed, you will see what God did not mean. Clearly, there's something he didn't mean, because you will see how things develop as we proceed. Now, because of this, because of this statement, and this was something that was well known. There shall no man see me and live. That's what God says. And so we can understand the reaction of a few people. Let me read a few people here in the Old Testament who had certain experiences. For example, in Genesis 32 and verse 30, it is referring to the time when Jacob wrestled with the angel that night. We remember that story. It says in verse 30, Genesis 32, and Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. You read the statement, and what do you see? You see Jacob saying, I passed through a miracle. I went through something that is so amazing, it's almost unbelievable. I saw God and I lived. Now clearly, he never saw the face of God in the sense of what God said to Moses. But what he means is, I had an encounter with God that was kind of face to face, because if you wrestle with a man, you're very closely in contact with that person. And of course, we understand that this was an angel, not God himself. But as I pointed out, I don't even know when I pointed it out. Might have been Thursday, might have been Wednesday night. But what I pointed out is that when God sends a messenger to represent him, that messenger speaks and acts as God. For you, the person, that is effectively God. And this is what Jacob meant. He didn't mean, well, I don't know if he meant I saw God Almighty. I don't know if he even knew the difference. What he meant was, I had a divine encounter. I had a divine encounter, and my life is preserved. But as you look at the statement, you can feel Jacob's amazement. I'm alive. I'm alive. It's like when my sister got married. Well, my sister, she has been married more than once, but the first time she got married to a man from Germany. And I remember they had their wedding in Jamaica here in Kingston. But some of her husband's sisters came to the wedding. And at the wedding they were giving their little toasts and their little talk. And one of them said, when we were children, I remember we went into the woods and we found some mushrooms and we ate the mushrooms. And then you could hear the excitement in her voice. And we lived. We lived. And because mushrooms can be deadly poisonous. So as an adult, she was thinking back that as children, they went and they ate random mushrooms and they happened to live. It was an amazing thing. And I kind of feel this in Jacob's statement. I have seen God face to face and I lived. So why am I saying this? What I'm saying is that there was the expectation. You can feel here the fear of God. You can feel fear of God because there's the expectation, if I see God, I am not supposed to survive. You can see the way they felt about God. And I want to show you that this was not just Jacob. Look at the parents of Samson. Look at what Samson's father says to his wife. And Manoah in verse 22, Judges 13 and verse 22. And Manoah said unto his wife, we shall surely die because we have seen God. You see what I'm saying? This is the way they felt about God. God was a frightful person. If you read the Old Testament, you'll see these words used to describe God. The great and terrible God. It appears twice in Nehemiah. The great and terrible God. And then when it talks about 3 different places, it talks about God's great terribleness. Terrible is a word that we use to describe something frightening. This is how they felt about God. In Exodus 20 and verse 19, you see the same thing reflected in the statement of the Israelites. After God spoke the 10 Commandments, it says, and they said unto Moses, speak thou with us and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. If we see God, we are dead. If God talks to us, we are dead. If we wrestle with God, we are dead. All right, you can understand why they wanted God's protection. They wanted God's power, but they did not want God because it was frightening. God was a frightful person. And so when God says, don't make any image, one of the things that God was emphasizing was an image. If you focus on an image, you belittle the power and the greatness of God. This was what was emphasized. And I want to make the point again, brothers and sisters, that the more you look into these things, the more you can see that there is a stark difference between the old and the new covenant. The emphasis is different. What God is saying is the same, but it is different. It's different. There is a very important difference, and we need to take it into consideration every time we read the Bible. You can't just read the Bible and think that both covenants are saying the same thing in the same way. It's different. God's point in the Old Testament is his power. When you come to the New Testament, there is a different emphasis. Now, there's a song that is kind of popular, but there's a line in it. Some of us might know it, but it's entitled "Mary, Did You Know?" And there's a line in it that I kind of like. I find it interesting. It says, "Mary, did you know that your baby child would one day heal a blind man? Did you know that your little child would calm the sea with his hand?" But the end of the chorus says, "When you kissed your sleeping baby, that you kissed the face of God." Mary, did you know when you kissed your sleeping baby that you kissed the face of God? It's kind of awesome, kind of a little frightening as well to think of what it is saying, and you think, my goodness, can that possibly be true? And yet, it somehow brings into stark reality the truth of what happened when Jesus Christ became a man, of the great wonder of what happened when God sent his son. When you kissed your sleeping baby, you kissed the face of God. Pretty amazing. So we read in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and I'm going to read from verse 3. And like I say, I'm reading things that we're familiar with, but I love to go back over these things because they are really striking. They are really things we need to always bear in mind. Paul says, "But if our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God," who is the image of God, "should shine unto them." I'm emphasizing here the image of God because God says we should have no image. We should not make any graven images. Well, this is not a graven images. This is not a graven image. This is actually a living image. This is an image of God, but it's not a graven image. It's a living image. And we want to see why this is different from a graven image. Why God not only permits, but promotes, but gives us a living image when he says a graven image is taboo, is a no-no. We continue. It says, "For we preach not ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord, and ourselves your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, hath shined in our hearts, to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." I tell you, the Jews don't know what they are missing. Can you imagine that you only have the old covenant and you don't have the new covenant? Can you imagine that you don't know the New Testament and don't understand what these verses are saying? Because the old covenant tells you nobody can see the face of God and live. The new covenant tells you the face of God is seen in the face of Jesus Christ. The new covenant is kind of contradicting the old covenant unless you understand what it means. And if you don't understand what it means, you are missing such a blessing. You are still living, nobody can see the face of God and live. You are still living, if I see God, I will die. You are still living. I need to be afraid of this God. But the new covenant tells me the glory of God has appeared in the face of Jesus Christ, who is the image of God. It tells you something else in Hebrews 1 verses 1 and 3. Well-known verse. God who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds, who, being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person. All right, there are two words here that I want to emphasize: his glory, and secondly, express image, the exact image. This means that Jesus is exactly like God. This means that he is the glory of God. The full expression of God's glory can be seen in Jesus Christ. So if somebody asks me, as a matter of fact, nobody has to ask me because somebody asked Jesus a question. I want to look at the question that he was asked. In John 14, from verse 8, Philip dares to ask what Moses asked. Philip said unto him, Lord, show us the Father, and it sufficeth us. What Philip is saying is what Moses said to God. Moses says, I beg you, show me your glory. Philip is asking the same favor. Show us the Father. I don't know what he expects to see. I don't know what Philip expects to see, but they are learning that Jesus is a miracle worker, that he has the air of God. He has the inside track to God. And so whatever is in Philip's mind, he says, Jesus, I have a favor to ask you. Show us God. Show us the Father. That's all I want of you. And he sat back to see what would happen. I don't know if he expected the answer. But Jesus said unto him, have I been so long time with you, and yet hast thou not known me, Philip? He that hath seen me hath seen the Father. And how sayest thou then, show us the Father? So it is not correct to see that nobody has ever seen God, or that nobody can see God. It's not correct. This is an Old Testament reality. It's an Old Testament idea. According to the New Testament, Jesus says, the person who saw him saw God. You know, those who have seen him, they have seen the Father. He and the Father are one. And I don't know, maybe this is not what Philip expected to see. Maybe Philip expected to see maybe something like what Peter, James, and John saw when Jesus was transfigured. They expected, maybe he expected to be taken on a mountain and the heavens to open and the face of God to appear in a light brighter than the sun. Maybe he expected to see this. But Jesus gave him not what he expected, but what he needed. Jesus gave him the truth. And the truth is, Jesus says, I am the truth. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the truth about the Father. I am what you need to know about God. He who has seen me has seen the Father. So what God says to us basically here, I'm going to put it in my words. God says, you shall make no graven image, because I'm going to give you a living image. I'm going to give you a living image. And the difference between a graven image and a living image, because when you have a graven image, the details are left to your imagination. It's your imagination that fills in the gaps. And that is what is so dangerous about a limited image. And I can apply this in many ways. If we go back to the illustration I gave, you see a photograph of a girl. What do you see? You see her rounded cheeks. You see her full lips. You see her nice hair. You see her attractive body. You have seen very little. You have seen very little. This image does not qualify you to know this person or to determine if this person is good to know. This is why when you look at the Ten Commandments, I have often compared the Ten Commandments to a photograph, because we say the Ten Commandments are an expression of God's character. So they're an expression. They're a one-sided expression. They're an expression of God's character on one plane. You relate to that expression, and you have a very limited concept of God. In a sense, the Ten Commandments are an image. You need to understand and to know God. We need something far more comprehensive than simply 10 statements. And that is why the true law of God, we say all the while, is Jesus Christ. We see the true law of God. We see the true nature of God, the true character of God, the true image of God, the express image of God as we look at Jesus Christ. God gave us a living image, not a dead image. So in John 1 and verse 18, it says, no man has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. Now, you know, a lot of people use this statement. No man has seen God at any time. I know people who use this statement to support the idea that Enoch never went to heaven, Elijah never went to heaven, Moses was never resurrected and taken to heaven, because they say the verse says no man has seen God at any time. And then Enoch was a man, Elijah was a man, Moses was and is. They all are men. So they say this verse, and this illustrates sometimes. This illustrates how it is that many times people take the Bible out of context. They read a sentence in the Bible, but they don't understand what they are reading, because the verse is in isolation. Because is this saying nobody has ever seen God? The verse says it, but what does it mean? It simply means, I mean, when you look at the other verses we have been looking at, Jacob said, I have seen God and I'm alive. Moses says, the Bible says Moses spoke to God face to face as a man speaks to his friend, but God says, nobody can see my face and live. The same Bible says that the 70 elders of Israel, they saw the God of Israel, although we understand they never saw his face. God put Moses in a cleft in the rock and he passed and says, you can see my back parts. But then the Bible says Moses spoke to God face to face. Obviously, face to face is an expression meaning personal interaction. It doesn't mean face seeing face. But then you come to the New Testament, and in spite of all of this, John says, no man has seen God at any time. And you question, is the Bible contradicting itself? No, it simply means that you read the Bible in context and you understand, what is this verse saying? How many people knew God the way God is before Jesus came? Nobody, no human being ever knew God the way God really is before Jesus came. Nobody. Why? Because nobody ever saw God in this way. This is what the verse is saying. Nobody ever saw God the way he really is at any time. Nobody, no man. The only person who could teach us what God is like is the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father. He declared God. He made us know what God is like. And that is what the verse means. It's not a theological statement to say who went to heaven and who didn't go to heaven. That is to completely misunderstand the verse. So in John 17, here's what Jesus says. I have manifested thy name. I have revealed your name. I have demonstrated your name. And we understand name here to signify the character. I have manifested your name unto the men which thou gavest me out of the world. John 17, verse 6. In verse 4, he says, I have glorified thee on the earth. The glory of God in the Old Testament is a bright, shining light with energy and demonstration to frighten the life out of you. Jesus gave no such demonstration, and yet he says, I have glorified thee on the earth. He revealed God's glory. He manifested the name of God. He declared what God is like. And how did he do this? If you go through the New Testament, go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, can you find any place where Jesus sits down his disciples and tells them, this is what the character of God is like? No, I can't find it. What I find is Jesus telling parable upon parable. It's Jesus having experience upon experience where he's demonstrating something completely contrary to the ideas that people have. Let's just mention a few of them. I'm going to refer to these as snapshots of God. Okay, since we are talking about images, let me maintain the idea of imagery, and I'm going to call these snapshots of God, photographs. All right, you're all familiar with the modern concept of a photograph that you call a panorama. Many cameras can do it. What you do are the iPhone will do it. I think maybe the other phones do it as well. What you do is you take a picture, you move a little, take another one, 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 and finally the software in the camera stitches all of them together, and you have one huge picture that takes in the whole landscape. You can almost go 360 degrees. Normally you can take a little picture which just takes a little corner. You see a little green. But when you snap and take all the pictures and put them together, you get a panorama, you get a comprehensive view of what the thing really is. This is what Jesus gives us. He gives us snapshots of God. And I'll mention a few. Many times we read the parables of Jesus and we don't even get the main point. But the real point of Jesus' parables, many of them, was to help us to understand what God is like. For example, the story of the prodigal son. Look at that story back and forth. I suppose you could say one of the lessons we find there is the bad-mindedness of the elder brother. Maybe you could find the foolishness of young people. Take your father's money and go on to spend it on women and wild living. But this was not the main point of Jesus. Jesus' point in this story was a father's attitude to somebody who completely deserved nothing, absolutely deserved nothing. This is the point of the story. He told a whole story to just teach us how God treats people who deserve nothing. Is there any other point to the story? When you read a story, you have to focus in and zero in and say, what is the point? You have to skip the peripherals to get to the main point. The boy comes back and he is making his excuses. Make me a servant. This is me. This is us. This is how we feel because we let down God and we disgrace God and we deliberately did it in his face. We knew what we were doing and we did it. And when you do this as a human being, other people will say, you knew what you were doing. You deserve what you are getting. You must suffer. That's what people will say. What does the father in Jesus' story do? He does not even allow the boy to finish his confession. He instantly throws the robe around him so his nakedness, his filth and dirt does not appear. He takes off his ring and puts it on his finger to signify, this is my son, authority, sonship in his dirt and everything. The father accepts him back. What does he do? He makes a big feast to celebrate his son coming back home. This is the face of Jesus Christ. This is the face of God that we see in the face of Jesus Christ. The lost sheep, a similar story. And what is it? What is the point here? The point is that the sheep wandered away by itself. And I tell you, if I have 100 sheep and one goes missing, I'm not a shepherd. But the idea of going away into the wilderness to look for one sheep after dark at night, and yet I kind of understand. When I was a boy, I was just barely out of high school, and I started working. I was probably about 18, but I was living with my parents, lived with them for a few years after that. I was still a boy, just left high school, but I was working, and I would go away on Friday nights up into the bushes with my friends to play poker and to smoke I used to smoke a little bit of weed with them and gamble. And my father didn't want to embarrass me because I was a young man. But I remember one Friday night, I was there with my friends, gambling and feeling quite comfortable. And I saw the flashlight coming through the bushes. And the only person who walked around with a flashlight was my father. And he came to us in the darkness and he just said, come. I got up and I went home. I was kind of embarrassed, but I went with him and he never said a word. I just went home. I mean, even though I was turning away from God and he knew I was getting wild, but he we still understood that Friday night was almost sacred. Friday night was sacred. Certain things we didn't do. We didn't curse bad words. We didn't certain things just was not a part of the family, even if you are not a Christian. So I went with him. But it was always something about my father. If my mother went to look for her relatives in Montego Bay on the other side of the island, when it was time for her to come home, my father was, it's like he was obsessed. He would get up, get his flashlight and be out on the road waiting to see if the bus or the taxi would come. He was always concerned, always very, very agitated when any of his family was out and he didn't quite know where they were. So I kind of have an understanding of how the shepherd felt for the lost sheep. But what is interesting, God does not depict this lost thing as a person, but as a sheep, because it's kind of like property, right? A sheep is like property, not so much that you have so much affection as for a person, but God is showing us that He loves us as His sons in the prodigal son. He loves us as His property in the lost sheep and the lost coin. And how much He cares for us, Jesus shows, because Zacchaeus, in the case of Zacchaeus, I don't know, one of one of the categories of people that we are very intolerant of is public officials. All right, we look upon these politicians as thieves and scoundrels. They use the people and they manipulate the people and they have their own agendas, and instinctively we do not trust these public figures, and correctly so, because Zacchaeus was a thief. Zacchaeus was a thief. He was robbing the people blind. But you know, Zacchaeus was somebody's child. He had a mother and he had a father. Somewhere in his life, something made him take a wrong turn. And the only person that could understand this was somebody who had the heart of God. And so when he scrambles up in the tree, the little short man scrambles up in the tree, too insecure, too aware of his unworthiness to face Jesus, to dare to put himself in the face of this holy person, this man with the image of God, too afraid to face the man with the image of God. Zacchaeus, the thief and the cheat, climbs up in the tree just to glimpse him. And lo and behold, the heart of God is looking for this little man. Like He's looking for everybody, no matter how bad you are. And wonder of wonders, He says, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to have a meal at your home. He invites himself to Zacchaeus' home because he knows Zacchaeus will never have the courage to invite him. And that's the day when Zacchaeus is converted and his whole house finds salvation. This is the face of God. Not thunder and lightning on a mountain, not fearsome terribleness that you need to run and hide when you hear Him coming, not somebody that you need to say, please go and talk to him for me, because I can't, we don't want to hear him anymore. No, the glory of God that we see in the face of Jesus Christ, the image of God, is something extremely beautiful. And you have these pictures all over. I mean, we have been through them before, but they are amazing. And when we have the time, we should take these snapshots and go through them in detail. The woman who comes to the house, look here, this woman, I think she's the woman that Jesus saved in adultery. All right, she is Mary. Her brother is Lazarus and her sister is Martha, and they are Jesus's friends. But Mary is despised because she has been a prostitute. Jesus is sitting in the house of a Pharisee. Can you imagine? He's a big church official, right? He invites Jesus to dinner, so Jesus goes. And here comes a woman creeping in through the door. What does she have? She has a bottle of ointment that she has paid all her wages for 1 year. All the wages that she got doing her work, her questionable job. She spends everything and she buys this bottle of ointment and she comes. And she creeps up to his feet. And she doesn't come to his face, because how could she dare, as a woman with a dark reputation, to come to his face? So she comes to his feet and she pours the ointment on his foot. And the smell fills the room because it's a very expensive perfume. And everybody looks around, and this woman is at the feet of the guest of honor. And she's crying and she's wiping his feet with her hair. My goodness. And the Pharisee, Simon, says, this man can't be a prophet. He makes his judgment. All right, this man cannot be a prophet. What is he looking for? His concept of God is the terrible God who will smite this sinner dead, who will reject this woman because she's too unholy and too unclean. She has been a prostitute. She comes to touch holiness. Look here, if you touch the ark, you would drop dead. If this man was a man of God, he would know this woman cannot come near me. Because God says, the ground whereon you stand is holy ground. Don't come near me, prostitute. And so the man judges Jesus. But when we look at the image of God, the true image of God, what do we see? Jesus says, leave her alone. He says, woman, anywhere the gospel is told, this story will be told. He says, look here. I mean, he contrasts the woman. She has anointed my feet for the burial. She has not stopped kissing my feet. You never kissed me. You never anointed me. Look what she has done for me. Jesus gives us a completely different perspective on the face of God, on the image of God. And this is why God hates idolatry. And this is why God has given us a true image, a picture that we can look at and believe in. Not a picture of paint and paper, but a picture in living color, three-dimensional, living image that we can see the face of God. And that's almost the end of the story, but there's one more side to it, and it is this. Romans 8 and verse 29. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son. Hallelujah. That he might be the firstborn among many brethren. God does not only have one image, Jesus Christ, but he has many images. His plan is to have many snapshots, many photographs of himself. It was predestinated. It was God's plan. Those that he foreknew, you and me, he predestinated us that we shall be conformed to the image of his Son. We are to be like him. Those of us who are not already like him, we are to be like him. He's to be the firstborn among many brethren, the firstborn of the sons of God, all like our Father. Praise the Lord. 2 Corinthians 3 and verse 18 says, we all with open face, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord. God's Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus, is accomplishing this painting, is creating this image. Not an image of wood and stone, but a living image in you and me, in the image of God the Father. This is the truth of the image of God in this, the new covenant. So, we have run out of time, but I want to thank you all for being with me this morning, and I hope that these thoughts have refocused our mind on what it is that God is really like, and what we should always keep in mind as we think of God and of his glory. Thank you, brothers and sisters. My time is up. I don't know if Brother Howard is in the room, but I'm going to close off, and if he's not yet here and there are any comments or questions, we'll take it.